All right. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in. Sorry about last week that I wasn't able to be here, but I am doing better now. Glad to be back. And I know we've been a little chaotic and maybe the best word is inconsistent for the last couple of weeks, but hopefully we're back on track. We can keep everything going and everything on schedule. I'm still trying to figure out how to get my little bobblehead guy here. I'm still trying to see how I can get him on the screen instead of me. I'm not sure how that's going to work. I just think that's really, really cool. And hey, I really like him. Look, we could have him saying yes and no probably, but got to find a way that the way the camera is mounted, I can't keep him in the frame all of the time. So working on that, trying to come up with a solution for that because I'd really like to do that. We've been doing this series about what is God like, and I don't really know. It's a little bit different than what we normally do on Wednesday night. Usually we're very textual, and it's not that we're not textual, but usually we're very, maybe the best word is expository. We usually just take a section of the text and expound on that. On these lessons, we're kind of jumping around from place to place and seeing a lot of different things. So hopefully it will make sense, and hopefully I can teach this in a way that it makes sense. I mean, please feel free to send a question to my cell phone if you have my cell phone number. You can put it in the chat. I'm trying to monitor those. I've kind of gotten some things straightened out where I can keep a closer watch on the chats. So if you got a question, you can throw it in the chat. I can try to get it there. Just give me a couple of minutes to get to it. The live stream is usually somewhere between a minute to a minute and a half behind what I'm doing live. So it takes a little bit of time for me to get your messages sometimes because you're a few minutes behind me. But when you start thinking about what is God like, and tonight I want to talk, it's kind of centered based on I am who I am from Genesis chapter 3, verse 14. And when we start to think about the concept of God and what God is like and his attributes, I mean, sometimes they're very difficult, at least for me. I'm not saying this is true for you. I'm just saying it's true for me. Sometimes for me, it's very difficult to grasp some of the concepts and some of the things that we look at when we consider when we start thinking about God. So tonight we want to talk about this idea that God is omnipresent. And I know it sounds, I remember the first time I heard that word, I scratched in my head thinking, what in the world does that mean? I was very, I think I was very privileged to be honest with you. When I went to Lipscomb my freshman year, I'm not sure, but I think it might have been the first quarter. We were on the quarter system then, and Dr. Rubel Shelley was teaching the book, I believe, Because by Batzel Barrett Baxter, which was a kind of a proof of God book. It looked at the cosmological argument, some other arguments. We won't get into all of that stuff. But I remember this concept of God being omnipresent. And it's not that I didn't know that God was omnipresent before that, but I really haven't sat down to really consider really what that meant. Like everything. I mean, let me think about this, but I think this is a true statement. I just didn't really ponder this much before class, but outside of God, which we do experience him on this earth, so I don't want to say everything that we experience on this earth because we do experience God, the Father, the Son, the Spirit, and the omnipresence of God, but almost everything else, right? It seems is always limited by space, distance, in some way. Like I can't, even though I'd really like to in some ways, I can't be two places at the same time. I mean, there are times I'd really like to, but you just can't. You can't do that. I mean, what you can accomplish is very much limited by space. And it's limited by time. I can't be in two different time periods at the same time. In fact, the time period I'm in, that's the only one that I have. So when we talk about the omnipresence of God, especially when you're thinking about limited by space and by time, and then you think about a God who is not limited by that. I mean, he is the concept that God is everywhere at the same time. You know, the one who spoke and the worlds appeared, the one whose voice sustains creation, and, you know, his power commands galaxies, but his presence fills every heartbeat at every time and every hidden place. And to think of a being that is like that, it's almost too much to comprehend. You know, in Psalm 139, verses 1 through 12. And if you have a Bible, you can jump on there and grab that. If you don't, I'm going to share mine with you, and hopefully you can, you know, hopefully the text is large enough you can read this on the screen. This is actually the New International Version. My affinity, the New International Version, 1984 edition, that's the one I grew up reading. So when I read from an English translation, that's usually what I read. And so in Psalm 139, 1 through 12, David writes, says, for the director of music of David, a psalm. O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. Man, I don't want to go down that path tonight, but just think about that for a second. Before a word even gets to your tongue, God knows it completely. I'll be very honest. Most of the time, I don't even know completely the word that's on my tongue until it comes out, and then, you know, sometimes you want to take it back. You hem me in behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. And then verse 7 is kind of what I wanted to talk about for a little bit. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. You know, when you first read those words, you might almost think that you're reading words from someone who is trying to find a way to escape God. You know, I think about Jonah when God commanded Jonah to go to Nineveh, and you know the story. We're not going to get into the story tonight, just an illustration. And Jonah goes the opposite direction and goes he's planning on going as far as he knows to go in the opposite direction, maybe in a way to escape God, or maybe a way to get away from the mission that God has commissioned him to do. And it's not, I don't think, get that same impression of David here. This is not a person who's panicking, trying to get away from God. It's someone who is awakening and discovering that God's presence, it's not a place that you find. It's not like a reality that you can outrun. It is, he's describing what sounds almost, and I guess in a way it is, it's miraculous. You know, David, it's not like he's trying to build a map here and trying to mark out where God is and where God's not. He's understanding that wherever he goes, the same presence meets him. You know, it's not God watching from a distance, but it's God walking beside him. And I think with David, you know, when I read these words, I see David coming to this realization that there is no place that he can go that God is not there. And it's not from the standpoint of trying to hide from any of that. It's from the standpoint of the comfort and the security of knowing, God, it doesn't matter where I am, you're there. Think about your world. You get up in the morning, God's there. You go to bed at night, God is there. You leave your house and you go to work, God is there. You leave your work and maybe your work requires you to travel and you jump on a jet and you fly all the way across the country, or maybe you fly halfway around the world. It doesn't matter. When you're there, and every spot in between point A and point B for you, God is there in every place. And it's not like God is spread thin across the universe. He is fully present in every place at once. And it's, the words are meant to bring us comfort. It's not like you ever get, maybe you decide to make a sandwich and you go to get, maybe you're getting mayonnaise, maybe it's peanut butter. I don't know, whatever kind of sandwich you like, and let's just use peanut butter for an illustration. You go and you grab the jar of peanut butter, and like the jar of peanut butter doesn't have much in it. So you have to spread the peanut butter pretty thin on the piece of bread to make sure you get peanut butter on every part of the bread. It's not like God is spread thin. I mean, you can really glob the peanut butter on the piece of bread, and God is, that's kind of the image of God. So if you kneel by your bed and you whisper a prayer, God's there. He's not leaving someone else to hear you. He's there. He's fully attentive. He's fully aware. And while you're praying in this country and someone on the other side of the world is praying in their country, and that moment there, he is just as fully there as he is fully with you. He doesn't divide his attention. He gives his presence to everyone in the same way at the same time. So for David, I think for David, it's this adoration. There is no corner of creation, no shadow of the soul where God is absent. And for David, theologians, we call it omnipresence. I think David was just calling it comfort. And so when you have those moments that you feel distant from God, not kind of a rebellious way, just far, right? It's your awareness may fade, but his presence never does. And so David's question kind of becomes a reminder for us. You can't outrun God. You can't you can't go somewhere where he's not. So Jeremiah comes along, and Jeremiah gives something that's very, very similar to that in Jeremiah 23. And in context, Jeremiah is actually talking about some people who are speaking in his name that he never commissioned to speak in his name. But in God's explanation of that, he makes this statement. It's just the statement that I want to talk about for a moment. You can go back and read the context later. Am I only a God nearby, declares the Lord, and not a God far away? So God is nearby and far away at the same time. Can anyone hide in secret places that I can't see him, declares the Lord? Do I not feel heaven and earth? So think of that concept. God feels heaven and earth. If you picture all of heaven and earth as being a glass, and the glass is full of water. Water is all the way to the brim. That is the presence of God. So Israel, I think in some ways in the Old Testament, they began to think of God as localized, like he's a presence that they can manage, or he's a deity, a God that they can put in houses and walls of stone and ritual, whether it's the temple or a tabernacle, which is a tent. And what God is trying to explain to them in Jeremiah is, I'm not confined by a place. You can't, you can't trap wind in a jar, right? You can seal it. It can hold the air, but it can hold the wind. And that when you try to reduce God to a location, or even if you try to reduce God to a feeling or a single experience, the omnipresence of God cannot be captured. He can only be known. He's every place that is, he already inhabits. So you stand under a sky like tonight. I don't know what the sky's like tonight. I remember seeing the moon a few minutes ago when Diane and I went to dinner, and the moon was nice and pretty. And I'm sure that, I don't know if there's clouds in the sky in Middle Tennessee tonight, or if you can see the stars. But when you look at those stars, when you stand under that sky, that's just, stars just seem to fill it. We're not looking even looking up into that's not vast enough to contain God. I mean, when you try to compare even the greatness of the sky with God, the sky is small in comparison to his being. Like the galaxy is large, but God is absolutely limitless. And so when Paul comes over in Acts chapter 17 and he starts to talk to those who are in Athens, and he's standing on, usually we talk, say, Mars Hill in the Areopagus. He's there, and really, by the way, a really cool place to be. Thankful to have been there and stood there. He says, men of Athens, I see that you're very religious, for as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Now, what you worship is something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you. And here's his explanation of God. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. So when Paul is explaining this concept of God, you've got all of these altars that are carved, and all of these altars as they're trying to worship, and some of those altars are, parts and fragments of those are still standing out there. I guess they're the same ones, maybe others they put in there for tourists. I don't know. But, in the Greeks' concept that divinity was, he's kind of attached and detached at the same time, but Paul speaks of a God who stepped into time. He's not a concept that you kind of debate. He's just a presence that you encounter. So when you think about that, God's presence with us it just depends on his character. So he's near to Adam when Adam walks in the cool of the day. He's near to Hagar, and she's crying alone in the wilderness, right in the book of Genesis. He's near to Elijah. Elijah goes to the camp, and he's whispering. He's not in the fire, the storm, or the earthquake, but he's in the still, small voice. He's there with Mary when the angel says, the Lord is with you, and he's near to us now. He's not far from each one of us. Even when the room is quiet and your thoughts are loud, he's still near. When it seems unanswered, he's still near. When you run out of words, God is still near. So as David talks about that in Psalm 139, you go back to this thought, and he says, even the darkness is not dark to you. And when he's talking about that, there are a couple of ways to look at this. One is just the absence of light. He's just talking about physical darkness. But there's also something in the darkness of the soul. Excuse me. He's maybe talking about moments when God seems silent, when, those kind of seasons sometimes when prayers kind of echo and nothing seems to come back. Some have called that like the dark night of the soul. And usually in our spiritual journey somewhere, we feel sometimes that dark night of the soul, the darkness, or the darkness of grief, or maybe there's darkness that's related to shame when, the same failure repeats itself over and over and over, and it almost seems like it's becoming your identity, but it's not really your identity, because your identity is in Christ. There's the darkness sometimes of confusion. What God is doing doesn't really seem to make sense, and the path kind of looks lost, but by faith we know that God is working those things out, and we look at shadows and he sees clearly, and we lose our way, but he doesn't lose sight of us. Those kind of things, when you're stumbling through the night, that darkness is as light, and it's only another place for God to reveal his presence. If you think, even in this concept, if you think back, God's first words were spoken into darkness. Let there be light. So creation itself began in the dark, and God brought it to light, and creation began in the dark, and redemption also really kind of began in the dark. The tomb is sealed, and the lights go out, and I don't think they probably had a candle burning in Jesus' tomb. So you think in that tomb it was probably pitch black, it was dark, it's sealed with the stone. But even in the darkness of the tomb, God's still working. So I think what David is trying to say is when you feel darkness or you think about darkness, darkness is not a place where God disappears. Often darkness is the place where God begins his work. You know, the same presence that fills the morning sky is still there at the midnight when the sky is dark. He doesn't wait, like for sunrise to move. He moves in the night. He moves in the darkness. And what happens in the darkness is still heard by the same Father. If when we cry out, God, are you there? Then I think God probably just whispers back, well, I really never left. So I think as David writes this, and I don't know where in David's life he was when he wrote it. I meant to go back and look and see if I could figure that out. I don't know that you could figure it out from the Psalm. But there were a lot of times of darkness or pain or unpleasantness in David's life. And I think in comfort, David is saying, even in those times that God, you are always still there. Even darkness is not darkness to you. That's a word of hope. The same God who fills the heavens and the shadows does something sometimes that are unthankful. He doesn't just like enter the darkness. He entered our world and he brought light into the world. And so when you think maybe a little bit about that, so then you get this image of the light that came in the darkness of Bethlehem, where John just simply writes, the Word became flesh. And so if you ask the question, where is God? I mean, you search for him in the stars and in temples and laws and philosophies. You try to reach him with, in the Old Testament, sacrifices and rituals, or maybe we try to reason our way to God. But the truth is we can't climb high enough to get to God, either by action or by intelligence. So since we can't get to God, God chooses to come to us, and he came down, and it just simply says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The finite became an infant, and the Creator stepped into creation in human form, and the everywhere God, he entered someone. His glory in the Old Testament settled in the holiest of holies, and now it's taking up in Jesus, taking up residence in a human body. So just think about, just the concept of what that means, and really it's almost too deep to grasp, right? So the one that filled heaven and earth came in a body and was small enough at birth. He was small enough to be held. He took up residence, but he didn't take up residence in a palace. It was almost more like poverty in his world. It's not a lot of splendor. It's simplicity. Jesus is walking on the same ground that he spoke into existence, right? And so when we think about the incarnation, it's just not that God is visiting us temporarily. He's relocating the human story. And he has a face and a name, and he has scars. So if you want to really wonder what the presence of God looks like, Jesus points to himself, and he says, I've come to show you the Father. When we look at Jesus, we look at what God looks like. You ask, well, how would God treat a sinner? Well, he would treat a sinner like Jesus treats a sinner. How would God deal with pain? He deals with pain the way that Jesus dealt with pain, who is a man of sorrows. And not that was even as great as that was, right? As incredible as that was, then later Paul comes around and in 1 Corinthians, you can see this on the screen if you want, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own, you were bought at a price, therefore honor God with your body. So the story of God's presence, it begins in creation. It continues into the temple where the presence of God was. It's kind of got a climax of sorts in the incarnation, because God came to live in flesh, and he was Jesus walking on the earth. And now that continues in you, and so this is, it's kind of hard to see, it's dark, but that's a silhouette of a human being with this glowing in his chest. Not that the Holy Spirit just only resides in our chest, but I was trying to find a way to kind of make a way to illustrate that the same God who dwelt in the most holy now dwells in your heart as his home, and not, individually and also corporately through the church. And so when you're thinking about the omnipresence of God, but the incredible thing about the Holy Spirit and the Spirit of God, it is not just in one person. The Holy Spirit can be in every believer at the same time. Instead of being in this veil of separation, he's visible, he's manifest. The text uses the word manifest a lot. It's manifest in us. That is how God is visible. And you think, well, God is invisible and nobody can see him, right? He's out there in the somewhere, and nobody can look at him. No, God is visible, and he makes himself visible through the church and through those in whose spirit live. He lives, his spirit lives in them. So, God's not contained by walls, but the omnipresence of God. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is the omnipresence of God came a personal presence. He's not just with us, he's within us. And so every moment of your life echoes with divine companionship. But the divine companionship is not restricted to you because of the omnipresence of God. That divine companionship is with everyone at the same time. And so you think about walking somewhere, or like something like Isaiah 41:10, and God says, "Fear not, for I am with you." And it's like he's in this image, you got this, it looks like a father walking with a child. But it's not just this idea that God is walking with us and holding our hands. It's that God is so close to us that he's a part of us. And so if we start to believe we're on our own, like you're not walking with someone like that, then you can think that you're abandoned or unnoticed or unguarded. But when God says, "I am with you," he means that he is with you. And when he is with you, it means he's never going to be separated from you, because he chooses, his nature is the omnipresent nature of God. It's almost too incredible to even think about. So in Matthew chapter 28, when he comes and he gives the Great Commission, and he says, I'm with you, and I will always be with you. When he states that, surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age, is the verse I'm trying to remember. The cross is behind him. The grave is empty. The disciples have seen the unthinkable. I mean, they've seen a resurrected Jesus. Now they're standing on this hillside, and they're listening at this moment to a resurrected Jesus who is getting ready to ascend into the heavens. And he doesn't promise them safety. He doesn't promise them success. What he promises, and what he promises them, and what he promises us, is his presence. I am with you always to the end of the age. And it's not like that's just like this little farewell that Jesus is saying. And what he is saying is, no matter, he's looking at those disciples knowing they're going to go out in the world. And I think what he is trying to get them to understand is nothing that you face, no distance that you travel, you're going to be my witnesses over the entire world. There is not a moment in human history that you will find that I am not with you. I am with you no matter what. So when we're going through suffering, Jesus is there. When things are going well, Jesus is there. It's not just protection. It's more purpose. but that promise is still true. You know, it's really it's more of a way of living, right? You have to understand God is with you in every place, at every time, in every moment. So you think, I mean, I love a picture like this. I'm assuming this picture is, I don't know how they took this picture. If somebody came up with this picture, it's supposed to be the Milky Way. And you think about the greatness of all of that, and somewhere in there is a little planet called Earth, and even if you were able to capture just the enormous nature of space that is included in that picture, to God, it's small. I mean, it's small because of how incredibly present He is. So when you get to, spots like you just don't have any words. Words kind of met their limit. There is a God who's greater than words, or emotion seems to be fizzling out. There's a God who's greater than emotions. He is beyond our grasp and nearer than our breath, all at the same time. And so you ask, well, where is God? Well, God's everywhere. He's everywhere. He's here. He's within you. And it's not, we don't need to say that in a way that it's casual. We need to say it in a way that's really, really reverent. And think about this, the God who fills the cosmos, because world's too small of a world, the cosmos, the God that fills the cosmos is so personal and omnipresent that he calls you by name. The God that can speak galaxies into existence is the same God who's present enough to whisper comfort to your heart. The same God who holds the stars in the sky is the same God who holds you when times are difficult. And that's the miracle of divine presence. It's infinity bound to intimacy. And it's just, I mean, that's probably kind of a little buzzwordish. I didn't mean it to be like that. But, when you go back to that concept, the omnipresence of God, that God is everywhere, the enormous nature of God, but even in all of the enormous nature, he comes down to know everything about you. Before a word is on your lips, he knows it. There's no place you can go that he is not already there. And again, that's supposed to bring comfort. So anyway, hope you kind of enjoyed that, kind of rambled a little bit more than I wanted to. So sorry about that. But Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, we will be doing our lesson on Thanksgiving. Just doing a series of Bible class lessons leading up to Thanksgiving. So at 9 o'clock Sunday morning, please tune into that. On Sunday at 10 o'clock in worship, we'll be doing Jesus and Malachi. It is the last lesson of this series that we did of Jesus and the prophets. So kind of the core thought process in that is Day of the Lord, but looking forward to that lesson on Sunday morning. Hopefully you can join for those. Hope you've enjoyed the study together. I don't see any questions on there. So, and I don't see any questions. Let me check my text messages real quick. Don't see any questions there. Don't see any questions anywhere. So have a great evening and look forward to studying with you again next week.